This is the Flutter part of the talk. I guess I apologize that the React Native speaker couldn't make it, but maybe next time. So my name is Martin Rybak. I am the director of mobile at Convene, and I was a native mobile developer on iOS for over 6 years. Before that, I was a backend .NET developer for over 10 years. And I'm using Flutter for about a year now, and I love it so much that I actually organized the New York Flutter Meetup. That's our Twitter handle at NYC Flutter, and we've got a couple of events coming up that I'll tell you about. So in August, we're going to have a talk at Google about animations, and also somebody's going to speak about why they switched from Ionic to Flutter. The actual date is still to be determined. Then on Monday, September 10th, we're going to have what's called a Study Jam kickoff. So Study Jams, it's a Google program where Google has an online course that they recommend developers to take. And there's a particular course about Flutter. It's about 7 hours long. And it's about a lot of good topics, and they really want people to learn this stuff. So we're going to have a kickoff on September 10th, and then we're going to have a closing event on October 1st, which is going to be a showcase, right? So you're going to come back and kind of talk about what you learned. You had like an app you built on the side. You can definitely show it off to everybody. So super highly recommend you doing this if you're interested in Flutter. Now, if you are interested, I would say right now go to studyjams.flutter.camp. because we do have a limited number of spots, and you should get your registration as soon as possible.
Meetup groups?
I'm sorry?
You have a meetup?
Yes, we have a meetup group. It's the New York Flutter Developer Meetup. It's actually flutter.nyc is the website, flutter.nyc. And the Twitter handle is @NYCFlutter. Yeah, we try to meet about once a month. We usually have 2 speakers. I know the folks at Google very well. There's usually one Google speaker if the meetup is at Google, and then there's usually a community speaker in addition to that. So, sorry for watching you. It's studyjams.flutter.camp, and the actual meetup is flutter.nyc. Is that cool? Okay, cool. So
you and Meteor are running that? You and Meteor?
Meteor runs the Google Developer Group, and yes, the Study Jam is actually a co-op event with the Google Developer Group, so we're both running that Study Jam. All right, so what I wanted to start with is a little discussion about the Hamilton app. So guys, who here has seen Hamilton the musical? All right, still waiting for tickets? All right, and I guess, how many people have used the Hamilton app? Probably not. It is. All right, awesome. Okay, cool. So many people might not know that the agency that made that app, they were called Posse. They were given a pretty impossible task. They had a strict deadline. They had 3 months to build a full-featured, highly polished, custom-branded app on iOS and Android. Okay, that included a ticket lottery, a full e-commerce store, a news feed, a camera overlay, stickers, and more. And given their experience building mobile apps, they knew that a fully native solution was out of the question, right? It just would take too long. So they looked around at what cross-platform options were available. They looked at hybrid apps like Cordova and Ionic, and they just figured that it didn't really feel like a real mobile app. They looked at Xamarin, but that was kind of slow and buggy. They looked at React Native, but it really wasn't intended for custom cross-platform UI, and I'll get into why that's the case. React's mantra is really learn once, write anywhere. Meaning that once you learn the React style of doing things, you can apply that to all different areas, but as far as sharing code, it's not really intended for that. So it's not really write once, run anywhere. I'll go into that a little later. So finally, they decided on a new framework from Google called Flutter. Here is the official marketing lingo about Flutter. Flutter is Google's mobile UI framework for crafting high-quality native interfaces on iOS and Android in record time. Flutter works with existing code, it's used by developers and organizations around the world, and is free and open source. So in only 3 months, they were able to ship a beautiful app with all those features I mentioned. Today, they have over 1.5 million installs, 500,000 monthly active users, and 37 million lottery entries. And they have a whole lot of fans, as you can tell here in these tweets. And you know what? None of them knows or even cares that the app is written in Flutter, right? Because They just love how it works and how it feels. So I want to talk about kind of what makes Flutter unique at a technical level. So if there's one thing that you remember from this talk today, all right, is let it be this. Flutter renders its own UI, all right? So this is very similar to gaming engines like Cocos 2D or Unity. If you played like games, they look the same on both iOS and Android. They're actually using the technology similar to this. So Flutter draws its own pixels onto the screen using OpenGL on iOS and Vulkan on Android. So let that sink in because it's kind of scary and liberating at the same time. It's very different from other cross-platform frameworks, right? Like Xamarin or React Native, because those are just a layer of abstraction on top of iOS and Android, right? So that means that your Flutter app is completely insulated from all of the aging, bloated, and sometimes buggy APIs that iOS and Android provide you. So if you're an iOS developer, it means no UI kit, no view controllers, no nibs, storyboards, auto layout, or private view hierarchy hacking. If you're an Android developer, you're going to love that it doesn't have activities, fragments, XML layouts, app compat, libraries, or DEX method counts, right? Like none of this, all this is gone. So under the hood, it uses an open source graphics library called Skia, which is used by Google Chrome, Chrome OS, Firefox, and parts of Android. And on top of that, Flutter has a reactive UI framework comprised of elements that are called widgets. So widgets are small, immutable components that you use to compose your UI. They can be structural, like buttons or menus. They can be stylistic, like fonts or themes. They can embody layout, like padding, behavior, like gestures, state management, and animations. And Flutter comes with a whole bunch of widgets out of the box that implement material design, which is Google's style, and also iOS style, which is they call Cupertino. And then you compose these widgets together using a reactive UI paradigm, very, very similar to React Native. So what is a reactive UI? I think it may be worthwhile to talk about that a little bit. So let's start by talking about what it's not. All right. So in this example, I'm showing you a traditional imperative UI. And in this example, your code directly mutates or changes your UI based on events, right? I mean, it seems very simple, but what happens is, as your app gets more complex, this becomes harder to manage because you have all these different things changing all at once, and you can very easily end up in a state where you've got something weird. How many guys have used an app that did like some combination of gestures, and the app just totally became bizarre? Like and that is a state that the developers did not expect you to do, right? So that's kind of a common side effect of having imperative layouts. So in contrast, a reactive UI, parts of the UI are regenerated from data that represents that, right? And that's called state. So you guys may have heard this notion of state. That's what that is. And basically, as the state changes, your UI is going to update automatically, right? So all you need to worry about as a developer is how to mutate that state, and then trust that everything else is just going to look the way it does. So this makes complex UIs much easier to build and understand and reason about, and it prevents unexpected or inconsistent state. And this is a huge reason why React is so popular. Developers love it. Also, it encourages small, testable, and reusable components. So in Flutter, every widget has a build function. And that build function has to return exactly one widget, but that can have a bunch of children, right? So when a widget state changes, the widget is rebuilt, and then the Flutter framework does a diff against the previous build of that widget and figures out, okay, what are the minimal amount of changes I need to apply to the underlying render tree to make that change a reality? And this is kind of like the basis of reactive UIs. Now, widgets themselves are actually a case study in the single responsibility principle, which you guys may have heard of. It's one of the solid principles. They're super small and lightweight. They have a very, very shallow inheritance structure. So they favor composition over inheritance, and they have a really, really efficient layout. So widgets can only have one child for the most part, but there's also others like row and column, but those are laid out in a way that can be done in linear time. That basically means that as your app gets more and more complicated, it doesn't really affect the time complexity of that rendering. Whereas both iOS and Android have what's called superlinear layouts, which means that as you have more and more views, the whole layout starts getting slow and you start experiencing slowdowns. So that's why they always recommend you to keep your view hierarchies small, right? That's the advice we always get. Finally, there's different language and runtime features that help make this possible. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? What language are Flutter apps written in? Right?
Dart.
And it's called Dart. Okay, so I'll go into the details of Dart later, but first I kind of want to talk about this analogy here, that Dart is to Flutter as Ruby is to Rails, meaning that neither would really be possible, right, without their respective language choices. There's a lot of unique things in Dart that make Flutter possible, and same thing with Ruby. So I'll go over kind of what those things are. First, Dart runtime uses what's called generational garbage collection and allocation, right? That means that it's really efficient for allocating small objects. All it takes is a pointer bump versus a heap traversal, which is much more efficient. So it's perfect for Flutter because we create lots and lots of widgets a lot, and those are very short-lived. So it's actually perfect for Flutter. Second, like JavaScript, the Dart VM is single-threaded. So you can spawn another thread, but using something called an isolate. But that memory used by that thread is actually completely isolated. That's why it's called an isolate, right? But that means that multiple threads are never going to have access to the same shared memory. So that means you don't need locks, and without locks, you can actually speed up garbage collection substantially. It's a nice little feature of the Dart runtime. Third, Dart is one of the few languages that can be both compiled ahead of time, just in time, or transpiled to other languages like JavaScript. So that means that in release mode, Dart is actually compiled ahead of time to native ARM assembly code, right? So the same native code that your app's compiled to. That means it's super fast. In debug mode, though, it's compiled just in time, which lets you as a developer kind of update your code while your app is running and enable what's called hot reload. And that's one of the biggest benefits of React Native. And if you've used React Native or Flutter with hot reload, you can't go back to doing it the other way. It makes your development cycle so much faster. So instead of recompiling and restarting your app, you simply make your change, and usually with under a second, you see your changes applied. I mean, it's amazing. So Flutter is different from React Native in a very crucial way. So because React Native apps are written in JavaScript, the JavaScript realm has to communicate with the native realm over what's called the JavaScript bridge, which you may have heard of. And that's for it to receive touch events and also update the UI. That can end up being a big bottleneck and can result in poor performance. So for instance, in my last company, we had a team make a React Native app, and then it was fine in debug mode, but in release mode, it was really slow and choppy. And I was like, what's going on? And I asked them, what's the difference between your two builds? And they said, well, in release mode, we activate a lot of analytics. Oh, really? Okay, cool. Let's look into that. Well, it turns out that they were logging so many analytics events on the JavaScript side that they were conflicting with the traffic going over that bridge for all the UI stuff, and that's why it was becoming choppy. So really the solution there was to reduce the amount of logging that we're doing for analytics. But I remind you that that bridge is definitely there, and it's definitely something to look into. So Flutter also has a bridge to native, but because it's pre-compiled, it's a lot faster. Right? But more importantly, because Flutter draws its own UI instead of calling down to native platform stuff, there's actually no need to send all that data across the bridge in the first place. Okay, so this is a huge advantage. This is why Flutter is able to be so performant. All right, let's talk about Dart a little bit, for those of you who don't know. Really, it was created by Google a few years ago as their alternative to JavaScript. Right, so JavaScript, kind of has a bad rap out there, so people really complain about a lot of things, and they're probably right. There's a lot of things in there that just are a little scary. So Dart was created to kind of work around those limitations. And it's open source, mature, and battle tested. So actually Google's AdWords products, right, the ones that make them all the money, are actually written in Dart. So you know that it's well supported. People say that Dart is simple and boring, but in a good way. It's got pretty basic C-style syntax, so if you know JavaScript or if you know C# or Java, you're going to feel right at home in just a matter of hours, seriously. Dart is pretty similar to Java. It has generics, exceptions, and kind of all the things that you kind of feel right at home with Java about. There's also first-class support for features and streams, which are really great, and they kind of come from the whole functional world of programming. And then my absolute favorite is async and await. I know this came out recently in JavaScript, but this is an amazing way of writing asynchronous code in a way that looks synchronous, so you don't have to worry about having all these messy callbacks, which can just be terrible. There's also fantastic IDE support in Android Studio and Visual Studio Code, so you're going to feel really comfortable with that great tooling. But there's also weird things about Dart, and I'm going to kind of share with you kind of the things that I discovered, and this is by no means a full list or a prioritized list. I just kind of want to share them with you, developer to developer. There's no extension methods in Dart, so coming from C#, Objective-C, I'm really used to just being able to throw an instance method on a class, and I could just, and it makes a beautiful API, but that's not supported in Dart, and I don't think it will be. Enums can't have explicit values, so enums are backed by integers, but they're automatically zero indexed, and you can't specify what those are. So they always start at 0, 1, 2, and you can't like tie a particular enum value to a certain value that's coming from your API. That's kind of a bummer. There's no access modifiers, so if you want to have code be like private or protected or internal, all those different things, you really can't. The only way to do it is by prefixing either variable names or method names with an underscore, and that's how they become like hidden. So not too elegant. There's no method overloading, so in Dart all method names have to be unique. So you can't have a method with the same name but different parameters. So you can either just rename your methods or use what's called optional parameters. This one is kind of sticky. There's no interfaces or protocols. So, that's been all the rage in the past couple of years is like, protocol-oriented programming or interface-oriented programming. Always code to an interface, right? So they don't really have that. They have abstract classes, but then you can only implement one because it's an inheritance. So that's kind of a bummer. There's also no reflection support in the Flutter implementation of Dart, and that's actually for two reasons. One is that at compile time, the Dart compiler uses what's called tree shaking to actually remove parts of your code that you don't actually use. So there's no point in putting in methods and everything that you're never going to use. So they reduce the size of your binary by this tree shaking concept. It also makes reflection not quite possible because there's no way, you can't dynamically invoke code that's not there. Also, some people are saying that the on mobile reflection is very, very slow and won't work very well. So either way, you don't have reflection support. And that means that there's poor support for converting JSON into strongly typed objects at runtime. So the ways to do it are either you just take, at runtime, just take maps or dictionaries or arrays from your JSON conversion and just manually map them into your strongly typed objects, or you can use libraries that will kind of create auto-generate code for you at compile time to kind of make that easier. Okay, so after all that, what are the benefits of Flutter? So we talked about, okay, you can make cross-platform apps without sacrificing quality or performance. It's pretty obvious. The reactive approach leads to great, clean UI code. They have great support for built-in unit and UI testing. You get the real benefit of real-time development using hot reload. And you can write substantially less code to deliver features a lot faster. So how much faster? Well, let's look into it. So there was a blogger who did a comparison. He wrote a relatively small app natively on Android, right? And he counted that he had about 12,000 lines of code. And granted, that's including about 3,000 lines of XML, but whatever, that's part of your app. He wrote the same app in Flutter and ended up being a total of 1,992 lines of code. So basically, we're talking an order of magnitude less code. That means less code to read, less code to write, less bugs, right? This is just hands down a good thing. So, of course, nothing's perfect. So where are the hidden, dark, secret, hidden, scary edges of Flutter? I'll talk about a few that I'm aware of. First of all, you can't run app extensions or run background code in Flutter. So the reason is because your Flutter code has to live inside a view controller or an activity, and if that thing is not running or if it's not being shown by the OS, your code won't run. Right? So Now, obviously, there's ways to run code natively and have that interop with your Flutter app. So that's the way around this. But it still kind of stinks that you can't use your same code in the background. It does add a little bit of weight to your app. So amazingly enough, all the stuff I just described, the Dart runtime, all the Flutter libraries, everything is just paltry 7 megabytes, right? But I was at a meetup at Facebook where they talked about how for every 6 megabytes of increased app size, it results in a 1% reduction in downloads for their particular app. So this may or may not be a deal breaker for you. It's not 1.0 yet, so I think right now they're at a release preview. But there's over 3,000 issues on GitHub, right? So it's a good chance, well, not a good chance, but like look at those issues before you definitely commit, because you want to make sure there's nothing there that's a deal breaker for you. That said, the breadth of functionality is still a little limited. We still need more widgets and plugins to kind of do what we want. But they're constantly coming out with new ones, and also the Flutter community is really, really good. They're creating new stuff every day. Actually, just a few days ago, they came out with a slidable widget, which, if you guys are aware, like if you have like a table view cell, you can kind of slide it, and like some options show up behind it, right? You can actually interact with them. So that wasn't built into the Flutter framework. Somebody built that, but now we have it, and it works great. So them being Google, they're clearly working on optimizing Android first, and the native iOS look and feel is not so great. Again, they're trying to re-implement the way iOS looks, and there's a lot of nuance there. I mean, Apple's had many, many years to work on this stuff, right? So trying to copy the way Apple does things perfectly is going to be a little tricky. Whereas on Android, obviously, they have the benefit of knowing exactly what those animation timings and everything are. There's a drastic performance difference between debug and release mode, right? Drastic, because one is precompiled and the other is not, right? So what you're going to notice is, you may notice kind of like really poor performance in debug mode. So you're going to have to switch to release mode or profile mode every now and then, just to kind of like keep your sanity and make sure that like what you're doing is like still going to work in the wild. That's kind of a bummer, but it is what it is. The learning curve is a bit steep, not at the beginning, but then when you try to do some advanced stuff, especially around animations. That's a common complaint people have. So I know that they're working on ways to simplify that, and there's also some libraries you can use to make that a little bit conceptually easier, but that's kind of what it is. This is a big one. There's no support yet for embedding native OS views such as maps. All right, so let's say you have an application that shows like a Google map, a dynamic Google map that you can scroll and zoom into. You can't actually put that inside a Flutter app today. You can have a static map, right? But you can't have a dynamic one. I know they're working on ways to do this, but right now that's a limitation. You can, however, using plugins, you can actually call down to native code and then have your native code present an activity or control on top of your Flutter app, like a modal, right? And then have the modal go away, and then so it gives the illusion of it being but you can't embed the actual view inside your app. So that said, it's not great for embedding into an existing app. Let's say you have a fully functioning native app and launched right off Flutter. Recently, they enabled support for this, but I think in general, it's a lot easier just to assume your app is 100% Flutter. So, but they know that to get adoption, they can't rely on that. Like nobody's going to just all of a sudden rewrite their app in Flutter. So they are going to work on ways to make this an easier transition. This one kind of bothers me. There's no support yet for native binding to C or C++ libraries like SQLite or Realm. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use those things, just that means you have to go through, respectively, the iOS SDK or the Android SDK to use those things. And it's just not as efficient. I prefer the Dart code to talk directly to those C libraries. It'd be a lot more efficient. So I know they're working on this. And then also there's no support for SVG graphics, which is kind of a bummer. All right, so is Flutter right for your app? So here's some kind of thought experiments that you can do to kind of answer this question. If your app uses fully branded custom design, I would say, yeah, this is what Flutter is really, really good at. If your app adopts Google material design, you're going to feel right at home. Now, at the latest Google I/O, Google announced Material Design 2.0, which greatly increases the customizability of material design apps, and they actually really, really want you to use those customizations. They don't want every material design app to look like a stock Google app. So just because it says material design here, don't think that it means like some boring design. You can actually make that look really, really awesome. It's up to you, and the tools are there for you. If you have a small team and little time, kind of like the Posse agency that handles an app, you're going to get way more bang for your buck. If you love React UI architecture, you're going to feel right at it. And if you enjoy trying out new technologies and accepting the risk, you're going to love it. Okay, so if your app is really, really focused on looking like a native iOS app, you may want to try out Flutter as a proof of concept just to make sure that you're not going to be bothered by it. It doesn't feel 100% there, so it's called the uncanny valley problem, where your users may just feel something is intuitively off about your app and just not like it because of that. So now I know that this is a very important thing that Google is working on, and I know that the material design lead for Flutter here in New York, he's very actively collecting feedback about this, right? So if you do have things that don't look good in Flutter, definitely let the Flutter team know, and they're going to work on it.
There's also a platform widgets library that probably want a lot of.
That's right. Yeah. So somebody created an iOS widgets library on.
No, it's a dual. So basically, you bring in their library, and it determines what OS you're running on, and it'll basically put up a button for iOS or
so
iOS versus.
Cupertino and
Well, it would use both. So you go to material design. If it's an Android OS, it would go to Cupertino if it's an iOS.
Yeah, that's a good point. But those Cupertino libraries might not be like good enough.
Yeah.
So, but I did notice somebody created an alternative library to Cupertino that has some different implementations of iOS. So that also may be an option. So, but the good thing is it's all open source, right? So if you find a widget that doesn't look quite right, you can literally go down into the code, see what you want to change, and then make your own version of that, right? I mean, you don't know how amazing that is, right? So coming from an iOS developer background, Apple does everything they can to kind of like close everything, and you have to kind of figure out what they're trying to do, and things break. To be able to look deep inside your platform code all the way down to the rendering layer, I mean, it's just like priceless. I have no idea what a benefit that brings to your productivity. So it's amazing. Now, if you need bare metal performance, right, I mean, obviously a fully native app is the way to go, right? If you need to squeeze every ounce out of your app, if that's important to you, then let's say maybe Flutter's not right. But don't make that assumption just yet without trying it. So obviously, if you require inline map views or advanced things like AR or some like crazy photo processing, it may probably not the best candidate for you. Obviously, if your app can't afford to have that extra 7 megabytes of size, no-brainer. And here's an interesting point. If you want to share code with web, you have to think about what you're doing. So Angular and Dart work really well together because they're both Google products. So if your website's in Angular, Flutter makes a lot of sense for you. There's actually, if you do it right, there's probably good ways to share a lot of business logic between your code bases. Now, arguably React is probably winning the game right now in the front-end web frameworks, right? So if your website's written in React, honestly, you may have a better time just writing your app in React Native, if code sharing is important to you. But I do know that code sharing is kind of like a dream, and very few people actually do it. So before you throw out Flutter because you have a React website, really figure out if you're really going to be able to share that code, and it's that a big deal for you. Because if not, then there you go. Okay, what does Apple think? Okay, this is obviously a Google product, and I think it's very important to ask this question. So obviously, Apple wants you to make apps exclusively for iOS, right? Or at least first, right? So every new startup or a new product that comes out usually releases on iOS first, right? Proves out their product market fit, and then creates an Android app. That's how it's been. Apple really wants to keep it like that. Flutter really could change the game, right? Because if it's so easy to create a cross-platform app, why wouldn't you just release them both iOS and Android at the same time, right? So can Apple do anything to stop Flutter? And really the answer is no. So if they were to disallow Flutter apps at a technical level, they'd also have to break a lot of gaming frameworks like UDB and Cocos and things like that. So it's really unlikely that's ever going to happen. Now, at the latest WWDC, Apple announced that they're going to deprecate OpenGL in favor of a new API called Metal. And people started getting worried because they know Flutter uses OpenGL, but the Flutter team is actually working on doing the same thing with Metals. So everything's fine. All right, so lastly, no discussion about Flutter can be complete without discussing Fuchsia. So Google is kind of a tough place with Android. Right? You've been kind of following the news, but Google's in some legal trouble with Oracle because Oracle owns the Java APIs, and all of Android uses Java APIs. So they've got some legal problems. There's also a real big problem with fragmentation. Unlike iOS, there's a lot of stagnant versions of Android out there. And when Google releases a new version, it's going to take years before that gets rolled out. And there's probably many people that will never get it because their manufacturers or their cellular providers just aren't going to push that update out there, right? So that's a really bad place for Google to be in. So they are working on this new open source operating system called Fuchsia. And it's kind of like an open secret, but I don't think they've quite figured out what they're going to do yet. They're just kind of building it because they're Google and they can. So literally, it's not even based on Linux. It's based on their own kernel. And what's really, really interesting here, which is kind of like the cherry on top, is that Flutter is the UI layer for Fuchsia, right? So if you learn Flutter now, you are well preparing yourself for the inevitable day when Android goes away and it's replaced by Fuchsia, right? So that to me is just that seals the deal, right? So I'm ready for that. That's great. That means that the skills I'm learning now are not going to go to waste. That makes me really excited. So that's it for my talk. I'm going to go into a little bit of demo right now. I just wanted to say that I'm hiring. We're looking for experienced iOS and Android developers who are eager to learn Flutter. We're building a mobile-first platform to manage a nationwide network of event spaces and shared workspaces, kind of like WeWork. And we're using real-time indoor location tracking and room occupancy, and space utilization, and really kind of cool stuff. So also we got voted one of the great places to work in New York. So if you're interested and sounds cool, go ahead and talk to me afterwards.
Convene the conference center, they have here in the city.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're kind of like WeWork. They're in a bunch of cities and they've got shared space, kind of like this, but a little bit different.
Yeah. And then you mentioned about this. How about AngularJS? It's also by Google, right?
Yes.
How that work with this native React or Flutter?
Well, like I just said, Angular and Dart work really well together. You can actually write Angular apps in Dart. So if you are really enjoying Angular and you're heavily invested in it, you can probably find ways to, definitely can find ways of sharing code between your Angular and Flutter apps. The same goes for React.js and React Native.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Flutter is not JavaScript.
No, Flutter is not JavaScript at all. No. So I guess we can keep going to questions. It's cool. I do have a demo though, so I'm gonna.
Oh, demo.
Yeah.
Is there support for GraphQL?
I think somebody did make a package. Yeah. So there's a whole ecosystem of packages. It's called Pub, where pub.dartlang.org, and that's where all the Dart packages go. Right. So you can actually run Dart on the server as well, kind of like Node.js. You can have a server implementation of Dart. You can also have a Flutter version of Dart and a web version. So you can actually look for packages based on those things on Pub. And I think someone did create a GraphQL client. Yeah.
And FlutterCamp, one of the Google developers, saying they're working on a package to support GraphQL.
Yeah.
I thought he said that, so it's probably coming real soon.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you right now, the interest in Flutter has been skyrocketing. I'm noticing so many packages come out literally every day. It's astounding. I mean, this is the year. Everybody said that 2018 was the year Flutter was going to take off, and it's happening. It's huge. I mean, there's at least 150 meetup groups, in 50 different countries. I mean, it's huge. It's really taking off. So because of that, the ecosystem is thriving. There's people making packages, and if there's something out there that's not there, please go ahead and make it. I mean, you can actually get your foot in the door really early and actually be the guy or girl that created that package, that everybody uses. So, yes,
I have a question. So, if you wanted to make an app, like say, if you wanted to make the next Uber, call it Scoober, that live map view thing is not, is that a thing that could be coming in, is it sort of in 6 months we might have it? Or is it sort of don't hold your breath for that one,
Yeah. Well, I can't obviously promise anything, but
Of course.
I do know that it's a major source of pain for them. Like a lot of people are.
But they have like Google Maps, right? And this is from Google, so there's no way they will not let this integrate with,
It's a huge priority for them. Like they know. I think they just got to figure out how to do it efficiently and but it's Google, man. If anybody can do it, they can, right?
Yeah.
But I would say follow the issue on GitHub. Upload it, just comment on it, make them know that it's important to you.
Is the issue related into the way that it only does like one? It seems to be it does one view and does it well. And that seems to be what's going on here with Flutter. Is that it can only do one thing well, and it's it either does that one map view and that's it, or once you make the map view go away, then something else will go.
The challenge is that the map view is actually OpenGL, right? It's actually it's not using iOS or Android UIs. It's actually rendering its own UI, the same technology that Flutter is using to render itself. So I think we just got to figure out a way to make that work. But they're going to do it. They have to. It's just a matter of time. So definitely follow the issue on GitHub, upload it, talk about it in the forums. I mean, there might be workarounds even today. Who knows?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is it possible to make something on Facebook with
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go on YouTube, there's this guy that has these great videos. They're called Flutter challenges, and literally, I think every week he comes out with a video that says hey, let's go ahead and build Twitter today, or build some other really cool Tinder or something. Let's just re-implement that interface in Flutter. And the videos are 2 or 3 hours long, but they're so worth it because you can actually watch piece by piece those really amazing UIs come together. So yes, I think Facebook can exactly be built. Can definitely be built using tools that are Flutter.
All right, folks, we should probably start wrapping up, but I suspect Martin's going to stick around if you really want to talk to him and ask him more questions. Thank you so much, Martin, for this incredible presentation. I don't know about you, but Flutter seems pretty damn cool.